More than 500 million years ago, long before forests covered the continents, and long before animals walked across dry land, the planet was ruled by water. The oceans stretched across most of Earth's surface, calm and immense, moving in slow rhythms beneath a young sun. If someone could have drifted above those ancient seas, the scene would not have looked violent or dramatic. It would have looked peaceful, almost hypnotic, like a living world breathing quietly beneath gentle waves. Sunlight slipped easily through the shallow water, illuminating vast plains of soft sediment below. Strange and delicate creatures moved slowly through this environment. Some floated like translucent umbrellas, pulsing gently as they currents with the currents. Others crawled patiently along the seafloor, their bodies simple and soft, leaving faint trails in the mud. Trilobites wandered across the bottom like quiet travelers, their segmented shells catching brief flashes of light as they move. There were no sudden chases here, no violent struggles for survival. Most life followed a quieter strategy. Countless organisms survived by filtering tiny particles from the water, collecting drifting nutrients that flow endlessly through the sea. Others grazed slowly on thin carpets of microbial life that covered rocks and sediment. Energy moved gently through this ancient ecosystem, passing from microscopic producers to drifting animals in a calm and steady exchange. In this world, survival rarely demanded speed or aggression. Bodies remained soft because little threatened to sear them apart. Shells were rare, armor almost unnecessary. Life evolved at an unhurried pace, exploring shapes and forms without the constant pressure of attack. The oceans were filled with motion, yet the motion felt slow, like the steady turning of a tide rather than the tension of a battlefield. For millions of years this quiet balance continued. Generation after generation of organisms lived and died without ever needing to outrun a hunter or hide from pursuing eyes. The rules of evolution were different here. Success depended on absorbing food efficiently, drifting with currents, or settling into safe patches of seafloor where nutrients gathered. Nothing in this environment yet demanded claws, teeth, or speed. Yet even in the calmest ecosystems, change waits quietly beneath the surface. Evolution is never truly still. Small variations appear in every generation, tiny differences in shape or behavior that may seem meaningless at first. A slightly stronger muscle, a mouth able to grasp rather than simply filter, a body capable of moving a little faster than the drifting current. At the time, these changes would have passed unnoticed in the vastness of the oceans. But taken together, they hinted at something new beginning to form, an ability not just to exist in the water, but to interact with other living creatures in a far more direct way. The difference was subtle, almost invisible, yet its consequences would eventually reshape the entire history of life. Imagine the moment when one organism first realized that another drifting body could be more than a neighbor in the current, that it could be food. Such a realization may have begun with the smallest of experiments, a grasp that held a little longer, a bite that did not immediately release. In a peaceful ocean, even a tiny act like this would have carried enormous consequences. Because the moment one creature begins hunting another, the rules of life begin to change. Prey must learn to escape. Bodies must grow stronger or faster. Entire ecosystems must reorganize around danger and survival. The quiet balance of the ancient seas was standing at the edge of that transformation. Though no creature drifting through those waters could yet understand it, somewhere in those silent oceans, evolution was preparing its most dangerous idea. Not fire, not intelligence, not weapons. Simply the discovery that another living being could be captured and consumed. The day that lesson was learned, the history of life quietly turned in a new direction. Soon the peaceful currents would carry a different story, one shaped not by drifting life, but by pursuit, fear, and survival. In that distant world of drifting organisms and quiet seafloors, life was abundant, yet it remained strangely limited. The oceans were filled with creatures of many shapes, but almost all of them shared the same simple design. Their bodies were soft, delicate, and poorly suited for speed or force. They floated, crawled, or pulsed gently through the water, moving only as much as their fragile forms allowed. For millions of years, these limitations shaped the rules of survival. Most early animals lacked the structures that modern creatures take for granted. There were no sharp teeth waiting to seize prey, no claws designed to grip and tear, no powerful fins or limbs built for pursuit. The anatomy of early life was not designed for violence, because the environment did not demand it. Many organisms survived in ways that now seem almost passive. Some filtered microscopic particles from the surrounding water, drawing nourishment from the endless flow of plankton drifting through the sea. Others grazed slowly along the seafloor, scraping thin layers of microbial life that coated rocks and sediment like living dust. Movement itself was often slow and uncertain. Bodies were soft and flexible, lacking rigid skeletons that might support bursts of speed. Even the nervous systems of these early animals were simple, built to respond to basic changes in light or touch rather than to track moving targets. The oceans of that time did not reward aggression. They rewarded patience. Energy flowed through the ecosystem in a quiet, predictable pattern. Sunlight fed microscopic producers near the surface. These tiny organisms multiplied in vast numbers, becoming food for drifting filter feeders below. The chain continued slowly, with nutrients passing gently from one organism to another. In such a system, life rarely needed to struggle. Without hunters, there was little reason to develop defenses. Without prey that could escape, there was little reason to evolve speed. The balance of the ecosystem rested on a delicate simplicity that had endured for immense spans of time. Yet evolution is not guided by comfort or stability. It moves forward through endless variation, testing new possibilities in every generation. Among the countless soft-bodied creatures drifting through ancient seas, small differences began to appear. Most of these changes were subtle, barely noticeable against the vast background of life. But each variation carried the potential to alter how an organism interacted with its surroundings. A slightly stronger muscle might allow one animal to push itself forward through the water, rather than simply drift. A cluster of sensory cells might become more sensitive to motion nearby. A simple mouth opening might gain the ability to close more tightly around food. At first, these differences would have seemed meaningless. After all, the ecosystem offered little reason to use such abilities. There were no fleeing animals to chase, no prey to overpower. The ancient seas remained calm, filled with creatures that continued feeding in the slow and familiar ways their ancestors had followed for ages. But evolution does not create tools for the present alone. It creates possibilities. Those small changes, stronger muscles, more responsive senses, slightly more flexible mouths, were not yet weapons. They were merely biological experiments. Yet hidden within those experiments was the foundation of something entirely new. The ability to grasp, the ability to control movement, the ability to interact with another living body in a way that went beyond drifting past it. At some point, perhaps by accident, one organism may have closed its mouth around something larger than drifting particles. Perhaps a grasp lasted longer than usual. Perhaps a body reacted differently when another creature struggled nearby. Such moments would have been rare, almost invisible in the vast ocean. Yet the quiet ecosystem was beginning to change. Beneath the gentle currents and soft sediments, evolution was slowly assembling the first tools that could transform an organism from a passive feeder into something far more dangerous. The oceans still are peaceful, but their balance was becoming less certain. Tiny innovations were accumulating across generations, spreading through populations in ways no single creator. And somewhere within those growing possibilities waited a question that had never before existed in the history of life. If a body could grasp another creature, could it hold on? If evolution had begun assembling the tools for hunting, only one mystery remained. Which creature would be the first to use them? Time moved forward, slowly but relentlessly, and the quiet oceans of the ancient world began to change. The period that scientists now call the Cambrian brought with it a remarkable transformation. Life, which had once seemed simple and predictable, suddenly began exploring forms and structures never seen before. Bodies grew more complex. Movements became more deliberate. The seafloor filled with creatures whose shapes would appear almost alien to modern eyes. In these waters lived animals with segmented limbs that allowed them to crawl with purpose across the sediment. Others possessed sensitive antennae, capable of detecting vibrations in the surrounding water. Some carried newly evolved eyes, capable of distinguishing shapes and movement in ways that earlier organisms could never achieve. The oceans were becoming a laboratory of experimentation. At first, these changes did not appear dangerous. They simply gave animals new ways to move through their environment. A flexible body could swim with greater control. A pair of grasping limbs could steady an organism against shifting currents. Improved vision could help an animal locate patches of microbial food across the sea floor. Yet within this growing diversity, something extraordinary had begun to appear. Some creatures were no longer content to drift or graze slowly along the ocean floor. Their bodies had begun evolving for something far more active. Muscles strengthened. Limbs developed joints capable of quick movement. Sensory organs grew more refined, capable of detecting motion in the water. These animals were not just responding to their environment. They were beginning to interact with it. Among the most mysterious of these early hunters was a creature unlike anything that had come before. Today it is known as Anomalocaris, a name that translates loosely as unusual shrimp, though the animal itself was far stranger than that simple label. Imagine a long, flexible body gliding through Cambrian waters. At its head extended a pair of curved, grasping appendages lined with spines. These limbs could reach forward and close around objects drifting in the water. Beneath them sat a circular mouth made of hardened T-blite, the segments of a ranculate. To the peaceful animals of the Cambrian seas, such a creature would have been unlike anything they had encountered. It did not drift passively through the water. It moved with intention. Its flexible body allowed it to swim through the ocean with surprising speed. Its eyes, large and sensitive, could detect motion in the dim underwater light, and those grasping limbs were capable of capturing objects that tried to move away. For the first time in the history of life, an organism had the tools not only to encounter other animals, but to pursue them, at some point, perhaps in a moment no fossil could ever record. The experiment succeeded. A drifting animal may have been seized by those curved appendages. It may have struggled, pushing against the grip that held it. Yet the grip remained firm. Slowly the prey was drawn toward that strange circular mouth. The moment the first predator consumed another living creature, the quiet rules of the ancient oceans changed forever. What had once been a calm exchange of drifting nutrients became something far more dynamic. Prey species that had never needed to flee suddenly faced a terrifying new reality. Movement could now attract danger. Visibility could lead to capture. Even drifting peacefully through the water might place an animal directly in the path of a hunter. Predation had arrived. The change did not happen in a single instant, nor did it transform every ecosystem overnight. Yet the consequences of that first successful hunt spread quietly through the living world. Species that could detect danger had an advantage. Bodies that could escape quickly survived longer. Protective shells and defensive structures began appearing in future generations. The first predator had unknowingly triggered an evolutionary reaction that would ripple across millions of years. Because once hunting exists, life can never return to its earlier innocence. From that moment forward, every organism in the ocean faced a new and unsettling question: survive or become food. For countless ages, the oceans had known only quiet movement. Creatures drifted, grazed, and settled across the seafloor with little urgency. Life unfolded slowly, guided by currents and sunlight rather than danger. But the arrival of the first hunters introduced something entirely new into this ancient world. It was not simply a new feeding strategy. It was a new feeling woven into the fabric of life itself. Fear. At first, the change would have been subtle. A drifting organism suddenly seized by a passing predator. A creature disappearing from the water column where moments before it had floated peacefully. These events may have seemed rare, almost accidental, yet they carried consequences that rippled through entire populations. For the first time, survival depended not only on finding food, but on avoiding becoming food. Animals that had once floated freely now faced a silent threat moving through the same waters. Those unable to respond quickly enough vanished from the living record, leaving behind only faint traces in ancient sediments. But among the survivors, small changes began to appear. Some bodies grew harder. Minerals from seawater slowly became incorporated into outer layers of tissue, forming protective coverings that could resist pressure and damage. The earlier shells began appearing across the seafloor, simple at first but strong enough to shield delicate bodies from sudden attack. Other creatures took a different path. Instead of building armor, they evolved long defensive spines that made their bodies difficult to grasp or swallow. What had once been smooth, soft shapes drifting through water now bristled with sharp projections, silent warnings to any hunter that came too close. Still others found refuge beneath the surface itself. Many animals began burrowing into soft sediments, disappearing beneath the seafloor where predators could not easily reach them. Fossilized burrows preserved in ancient rock show intricate tunnels, carved by creatures seeking safety below the ocean floor. The once open seafloor slowly became a hidden world of movement beneath the mud. These changes did not occur over a single generation, yet compared with the slow pace that had once governed early life, the transformation was remarkably swift. Entire groups of organisms began evolving defensive structures within what, in geological terms, was a brief moment. The fossil record preserves this transition with surprising clarity. Layers of rock from this period show a sudden increase in shells, spines, and burrowing traces. It is as if life itself had become more cautious, more guarded, responding to dangers that had never existed before. The calm ecosystem of the earlier oceans had quietly vanished. In its place rose a world defined by tension. Animals moved more carefully, bodies hardened or concealed themselves. Every shape and structure now carried the mark of survival under threat. Predators did not remain unchanged either. As prey developed defenses, hunters faced new obstacles. A soft body was easy to capture, but a shelled organism required greater strength or more precise control. Spines made prey difficult to swallow. Burrows hid animals where grasping limbs could not reach. The struggle between hunter and hunted had begun shaping evolution itself. Each new defense forced predators to adapt. Each improved hunting method forced prey to evolve further protections. The ocean had entered a cycle of innovation that would never truly end. What began as a simple act of consumption had become a powerful engine driving biological change. Fear had entered the ocean, and life would never again evolve in the quiet, unhurried way it once had. Yet even the strongest armor brings a new problem for hunters. If prey could hide behind shells, spines, and predators, would need to find new ways to reach them. And so the next phase of the struggle was already beginning. The hunters would have to learn how to break through. Once prey began defending themselves, the balance of the oceans shifted again. The early predators that had once moved easily through drifting communities now faced a more difficult world. Shells hardened. Bodies grew spines. Creatures vanished into the safety of sediment below the seafloor. Food had not disappeared, but it had become harder to reach. For hunters, survival now required improvement. The predators that continued to drift passively through ancient seas gradually found themselves at a disadvantage. A grasp that once secured an easy meal now slipped against hardened shells. Soft-bodied prey that once floated openly now hid within burrows or protected themselves with sharp defenses. The quiet advantage predators once held had begun to fade. Evolution responded in the only way it ever could, through experimentation. Within predator populations, small variations began appearing. Some individuals possessed slightly stronger limbs capable of gripping more firmly. Others developed mouth structures that could close with greater pressure. These differences were subtle at first, yet they offered something valuable, a higher chance of capturing food. Those small advantages slowly spread through generations. Certain predators began evolving appendages designed specifically for holding struggling prey. These grasping limbs could curl around a moving body and maintain control long enough for the predator to bring it toward its mouth. For animals attempting to escape, the difference between a weak grasp and a strong one meant the difference between life and death. Meanwhile, changes were taking place in the sensory systems of these early hunters. Detecting prey in the water required more than chance encounters. Some predators began evolving more advanced eyes capable of recognizing movement in dim light. Compound eyes made of many tiny lenses working together allowed animals to observe their surroundings with surprising clarity. With improved vision came a new ability. Hunters could now see prey moving through the water before contact occurred. Instead of drifting blindly into food, they could direct their movements toward it. This change transformed the nature of hunting. Movement itself began evolving as well. Muscles strengthened and bodies grew more streamlined. Predators that could swim slightly faster gained a clear advantage over slower competitors. Even a small increase in speed allowed a hunter to close the distance before prey could escape or retreat into hiding. The oceans were slowly filling with creatures capable of active pursuit. For prey species, the consequences were immediate. The safety of armor and burrows still mattered, but now they faced predators that could track movement and approach with deliberate speed. A drifting organism could no longer assume safety simply because it had not been touched yet. The ancient seas had become environments of constant awareness. Yet perhaps the most important transformation was not visible in the body of any single animal. It was occurring within the ecosystem itself. Predation had begun shaping which species survived and which vanished. Animals that evolved effective hunting tools prospered. Those unable to compete gradually disappeared from the fossil record. Wet+by better adapted. Evolution itself had begun accelerating. What once unfolded slowly across immense spans of time was now being pushed forward by a powerful new force. Every improvement in hunting ability created pressure for prey to respond. Every defensive adaptation forced predators to develop stronger strategies. The two sides of this struggle were now locked together. The ocean had become a place of pursuit and escape, a world where survival depended on responding quickly to constant challenges. Predators were no longer rare experiments drifting through the water. They were becoming central players in the story of life. And as this tension between hunter and hunted intensified, something even larger was beginning to change. The structure of life itself was reorganizing. The quiet exchange of drifting nutrients that once defined the oceans was evolving into something more complex, more dynamic, and far more interconnected than anything that had existed before. Once predators and prey began shaping one another's evolution, the oceans quietly entered a new era. What had once been a simple exchange of drifting nutrients started transforming into something far more intricate. Life was no longer arranged in calm, predictable layers. It was reorganizing into a dynamic network of relationships that would eventually resemble the ecosystems we recognize today. In the earliest oceans, energy had flowed along simple paths. Microscopic organisms captured sunlight near the surface. Small animals filtered these organisms from the water. Nutrients passed slowly from one life form to another, rarely encountering resistance or interruption. The process resembled a gentle cycle, almost effortless in its balance. Predation changed that balance. When one animal began consuming another directly, a new pathway for energy appeared. Instead of drifting quietly through the food web, energy could now move upward through multiple levels of hunters and prey. Small grazers might be captured by larger animals. Those animals might, in turn, become food for even more powerful predators. The chain of life was lengthening. As these relationships multiplied, entirely new ecological roles began emerging across the oceans. Some creatures became specialized hunters, evolving bodies designed for pursuit and capture. Others survived by scavenging the remains left behind after attacks, feeding on fragments and discarded remains that settled onto the seafloor. Meanwhile, many animals continued grazing or filtering microscopic food from the water. Yet even these peaceful lifestyles now existed within a more dangerous world. A drifting grazer might suddenly become prey for a passing hunter. A slow-moving organism might survive only because it remained unnoticed within the shadows of the seabed. Each species now occupied a specific place within a growing network of survival strategies. Predation did not simply add violence to the ocean, it added structure. New behaviors began appearing as animals adapted to the presence of hunters. Some species gathered together in groups, reducing the chances that any single individual would be targeted. Others moved cautiously along the seafloor, pausing frequently as if listening for disturbances in the water. Burrowing became increasingly common. Beneath the sediment, entire communities formed within hidden tunnels and chambers. These underground networks provided refuge from predators moving above. Even migration began appearing in primitive forms. Certain animals shifted between habitats, moving through shallow waters or deeper environments where hunters were less active. The oceans were becoming environments filled with motion, strategy, and awareness. And as these relationships multiplied, the living world itself grew more diverse. Predators created opportunities for new species to evolve. A hunter capable of capturing shelled prey might dominate one habitat, while another predator specialized in soft-bodied animals somewhere else. Each new strategy opened space for additional forms of life to appear. The result was an explosion of ecological complexity. Instead of a quiet and uniform ocean, the Cambrian seas had become layered ecosystems filled with countless interactions. Every creature now influenced the survival of others around it. Energy moved through webs of connection rather than simple chains. This transformation carried a profound consequence. Without predators, the early oceans might have remained simple worlds of drifting organisms and slow-moving grazers. Evolution could have continued exploring forms of life, yet the urgency that drives adaptation might never have emerged. Predation created pressure, pressure created innovation, and innovation created diversity. The remarkable variety of life that now fills Earth's oceans, forests, and skies can trace its origins to this ancient turning point. The struggle between hunter and hunted forced life to become faster, stronger, more aware of its surroundings. In a strange way, danger helped life grow more complex. The first predator did far more than capture a meal. It introduced a relationship that reshaped the structure of ecosystems themselves. Hundreds of millions of years later, that relationship still defines the natural world. Every coral reef, grassland, and forest operates within the same delicate balance between predator and prey. The quiet experiment that began in the Cambrian oceans never ended. It simply continued evolving. And as that ancient arms race unfolded across time, it began producing creatures with increasingly advanced abilities, animals capable of sensing their environment, pursuing prey with precision, and defending themselves with remarkable strength, which raises an even deeper question. If this long struggle shaped the oceans so dramatically, how did it influence the animals that would eventually rise to dominate the planet? The appearance of predators did not simply introduce hunters into the oceans. It introduced pressure. And pressure, over time, changes everything. For countless generations before this turning point, many marine animals had lived without the need for serious protection. Their bodies remained soft, flexible, and exposed to the surrounding water. Such designs had worked perfectly well in a world where danger was rare and food drifted freely through the currents. But once predators began capturing these vulnerable creatures, the old designs no longer offered safety. Suddenly, survival depended on resisting attack. Within ancient oceans, countless encounters unfolded between hunter and prey. Some ended quickly, with a predator grasping and consuming an unprotected animal. But in rare moments, something different happened. A creature might survive long enough to reproduce after an attack, passing on a slightly tougher outer layer or a slightly stronger body structure to its offspring. Over many generations, those small advantages accumulated. The fossil record preserves the results of this transformation with remarkable clarity. In geological layers from the Cambrian period, scientists observe a southern and Wapik change in the bodies of marine animals. Creatures that once possessed soft tissues alone began developing hardened outer coverings. Minerals from seawater were incorporated into shells and protective plates, creating structures that predators could no longer easily crush or tear apart. What had once been delicate organisms drifting through calm seas were slowly becoming armored survivors. Trilobites provide one of the most striking examples of this shift. These ancient arthropods already possessed segmented bodies, but their outer shells gradually became more thick and more Some species developed the ability to roll themselves into protective shapes, shielding their vulnerable undersides from attack. Nearby, brachiopods, small marine animals that resembled clams, constructed rigid shells that enclosed their soft bodies within sturdy mineral walls. Early mollusks did something similar, secreting protective coverings that spiraled outward from their bodies. Across the seafloor, new shapes began appearing. Shells, plates, and hardened structures spread through marine ecosystems with surprising speed. But armor did not always take the form of a shell. Some animals evolved long defensive spines, projecting outward from their bodies. These sharp structures made predators think twice before attempting to swallow them. A mouth designed for soft prey could easily become trapped or injured by such defenses. In a world where survival depended on avoiding capture, even the smallest protective feature could mean the difference between extinction and survival. Over time, the ancient seafloor began to look very different from the peaceful world that had existed before predators arrived. Where soft-bodied creatures once drifted freely, armored animals now crept across sediment and rocks. The ocean floor became populated by creatures whose bodies carried the marks of a constant struggle. It was as if life itself had begun preparing for battle. The transformation was extraordinary because it revealed something profound about evolution. Before predators existed, there had been little reason for organisms to invest energy in heavy protective structures. Shells require minerals. Armor requires biological resources. In a peaceful ecosystem, such investments might even slow an animal down or limit its flexibility. But once predators appeared, protection became worth the cost. The oceans were quietly filling with creatures built not only to live but to survive attack, and yet armor alone could not end the struggle. Every defensive innovation forced predators to respond. A shell that protected prey from one type of attack created an incentive for hunters to develop stronger jaws or more precise methods of capture. Spines that discouraged swallowing encouraged predators to find new ways of breaking or dismantling their targets. The evolutionary contest had begun. Prey strengthened their defenses. Predators improved their weapons. Each side pushed the other forward through time, shaping the bodies and behaviors of countless species. The ancient oceans had entered a new phase of life, one defined by adaptation and resistance. But as shells thickened and armor spread across the seafloor, predators faced an increasingly difficult challenge. If prey could hide behind mineral walls and protective plates, hunters would need to discover something even more powerful. They would need to learn how to break through. As the struggle between predator and prey intensified, the bodies of ancient animals began changing in ways that would leave a permanent mark on the history of life. Survival was no longer determined only by movement or behavior. It was increasingly written into the very structure of the body itself. Across the oceans, a quiet but profound innovation began to spread. Animals started turning their bodies into armor. At first, these changes were subtle. Many early organisms already lived in seawater rich with dissolved minerals. Calcium and other elements drifted invisibly through the currents, part of the ocean's natural chemistry. But within certain species, evolution discovered a new possibility. These minerals could be incorporated into living tissue. Soft outer layers gradually hardened. Flexible skins began developing rigid supports. Over generations, animals learned to build structures that were not merely protective coverings, but solid frameworks capable of resisting pressure and impact. The result was the emergence of mineralized skeletons. For the first time in Earth's history, organisms were constructing bodies reinforced with substances like calcium carbonate and calcium phosphate. These materials formed durable shells, plates, and exoskeletons that dramatically improved an animal's chances of surviving a predator's attack. What began as protection quickly became something more. A hardened structure did not simply shield an organism from danger. It also provided support for stronger muscles. With a rigid framework to anchor movement, animals could crawl, burrow, or swim with greater control. Bodies that had once collapsed easily under pressure now held their shape against currents and contact. Strength, protection, and mobility were suddenly working together. The fossil record offers remarkable glimpses into this transformation. Trilobites, which had once possessed relatively simple shells, developed elaborate segmented exoskeletons composed of hardened mineral layers. These structures allowed them to withstand crushing pressure, and in some species even curl into tight defensive shapes when threatened. Elsewhere in the ancient seas, early mollusks began forming spiral shells that wrapped around their bodies like protective chambers. Inside these mineral coils, their delicate tissues remained shielded from predators that could not easily penetrate the rigid walls. Some organisms pursued an even more unusual defense. Instead of enclosing themselves within shells, they grew sharp trajections along their bodies. Long mineralized spines extended outward like barriers, making them difficult or dangerous to swallow. Each of these solutions reflected the same evolutionary pressure. Avoid being eaten. What makes this transformation so remarkable is not only the structures themselves, but when they appeared. Geological evidence suggests that the widespread development of hard body parts occurred shortly after predators entered the evolutionary landscape. In layers of rock where earlier fossils show mostly soft-bodied organisms, later layers suddenly contain shells, exoskeletons, and armored forms. The timing is difficult to ignore. It suggests that predators did far more than change the behavior of prey. Their presence reshaped the very kessa of animal bodies. The pressure to survive attacks drove life towards solutions that required entirely new biological strategies. Life was no longer experimenting only with movement or feeding. It was mining its physical structure. Oceans encased in mineral armor, the once soft seafloor communities became scapes of hardened forms. Chases encounters cattered across sediment, armored animals, slowly across the bottom spinned asms standing like resays against seas against. Yet even these remarkable defenses could not end the struggle. Evolution rarely allows one side of a conflict to remain dominant for long. As armor spread across the oceans, predators faced a new challenge. Prey that had once been easy to consume were now protected behind mineral walls and reinforced plates. The hunters would have to change again. If shells and skeletons made prey harder to eat, predators would need to evolve something stronger than simple grasping limbs. They would need the power to crush, pierce, and dismantle those defenses. As armor spread across the ancient oceans, predators faced an unexpected problem. The creatures that had once been easy to seize were now protected behind hardened shells and mineral plates. Grasping limbs that once secured a meal now struggled against surfaces that would not tear or bend. For hunters, the rules had changed again. Evolution responded in the only way it ever does, through relentless experimentation. Among predator populations, small variations began appearing. Some individuals possessed mouth structures that could close with slightly greater force. Others had limbs capable of applying pressure in ways earlier hunters could not. At first, these advantages were modest. A stronger grip might crack a thin shell. A more powerful bite might leave a small fracture along the edge of protective armor. Yet even minor damage could make the difference between escape and capture. Over time, those small advantages accumulated. Predators began evolving mouth parts capable of applying serious pressure. Instead of simply drawing prey toward their mouths, these structures could crush or break through the hardened or break through the hardenednesses that had spread across the seafloor. In some species, feeding plates formed rigid edges that could snap together like primitive shears. Other predators relied on specialized limbs rather than biting force. Grasping appendages became stronger and more flexible, capable of gripping shells and twisting them apart. Some hunters likely pried open protective coverings, exposing the soft tissue hidden inside. The struggle between hunter and prey had entered a new phase. Fossils from this period provide remarkable clues about how intense that struggle became. Trilobite shells discovered in ancient rock layers often bear unusual marks, fractures, dents, and irregular breaks that do not resemble damage caused by simple decay or geological pressure. Many of these injuries show signs of healing. A trilobite might display a crack running across part of its shell, yet the surrounding material has regrown and sealed the damage. This tells a quiet but powerful story. At some point during its life, the animal had survived an attack. A predator had attempted to crush or pierce its armor but failed to finish the job. The survivor carried that scar for the rest of its life. Such fossils reveal moments of struggle preserved across hundreds of millions of years. Each damaged shell represents a brief encounter between hunter and prey, an attempt, a defense, and sometimes a narrow escape. The seafloor was no longer merely a landscape of animals, feeding and drifting. It had become a place where attacks were attempted and resisted, where survival sometimes depended on whether armor could withstand the force of a predator's bite. In this environment, every improvement mattered. If prey developed thicker shells, predators that could apply greater pressure had an advantage. If predators evolved stronger mouthparts, prey with more durable armor were more likely to survive. Each side of the struggle pushed the other forward generation after generation. The oceans had become a battlefield of innovation, but unlike a battlefield between armies, this conflict had no clear end. Each advance triggered a response. Every defensive breakthrough forced predators to develop stronger methods of attack. Evolution itself was accelerating. Changes that once took immense spans of time now appeared more rapidly, driven by the constant pressure of survival. The arms race between predators and prey had become one of the most powerful forces shaping the direction of life on Earth. And as this struggle intensified, something even more remarkable began to emerge. Predators were no longer evolving only tools for breaking armor. Their bodies were gradually changing in ways that allowed them to track, pursue, and control prey with increasing precision. The next stage of evolution would produce animals designed not simply to grasp or crush their victims' boots, but to hunt them down. In the early stages of the predator-prey struggle, survival often depended on touch, chance, or proximity. A hunter might encounter prey simply by drifting into it or sensing subtle vibrations in the surrounding water. These encounters were unpredictable. Even a powerful predator could spend long stretches of time moving through empty ocean, unaware that potential food drifted only a short distance away. But evolution was already preparing a transformation that would change hunting forever. Some animals began developing organs capable of detecting light. At first, these structures were simple. A cluster of light-sensitive cells allowed an organism to sense brightness or shadow. Such a system could reveal whether the animal had moved into open water or toward darker depths. It was a modest advantage, yet even that small awareness improved survival. Over time, those clusters of cells became more refined. Depressions in the tissue allowed animals to sense the direction from which light was coming. Gradually, these early light sensors deepened and curved, forming primitive eyes capable of distinguishing shapes rather than mere brightness. The ocean was beginning to fill with creatures that could see. Among the most remarkable examples of this development appeared in trilobites. These ancient arthropods possessed compound eyes made from dozens or even hundreds of tiny lenses arranged across curved surfaces. Each lens captured a fragment of the surrounding environment, and together they formed a mosaic view of the world. Even more astonishing was the material from which these lenses were built. Many trilobite eyes were formed from calcite crystals, clear mineral structures that acted as natural lenses. Light passing through them was focused towards sensitive cells beneath, allowing the animal to detect motion and form surprisingly detailed images of its surroundings. For a creature living hundreds of millions of years ago, this ability represented a revolutionary advantage. Other animals developed visual systems designed for a different purpose. Certain predators evolved forward-facing eyes that allowed them to judge distance and direction with greater precision. By comparing information from both eyes, they could track the movement of prey through the water. Suddenly, hunting no longer depended entirely on luck. A predator could now observe the faint outline of a drifting organism from several body lengths away. It could detect movement long before contact occurred. Instead of waiting for prey to brush against its body, the hunter could steer toward it deliberately. The oceans were becoming environments filled with watchful eyes. For prey species, this new reality introduced an entirely different challenge. Armor and spines still offered protection once an attack began, but survival now depended on avoiding detection in the first place. Some animals began blending into their surroundings. Their bodies adopted colors or textures that mirrored the sediment below. Others spent more time hidden beneath the seafloor, emerging only briefly to feed before retreating again. A few species may even have altered their activity patterns, moving more frequently in dim conditions when predators could see less clearly. The presence of vision had introduced a new dimension to the ancient struggle. Life was no longer guided solely by strength and defense. Awareness had become part of survival. Every movement now carried risk. A sudden shift in the water could reveal the presence of prey. A faint shadow might signal the approach of danger. Predators had gained the ability to observe, and observation changed everything. Yet even the sharpest eyes could not capture prey alone. Detecting a target from across the water was only the beginning of the hunt. A predator might see its next meal drifting nearby, but if it could not close the distance quickly enough, that opportunity would vanish. To become truly effective hunters, predators would need more than sight. They would need speed. For most of the early history of life, the oceans moved slowly. Creatures drifted through the water or crept along the seafloor at an unhurried pace. Movement existed, of course, but it was rarely urgent. In a world where food often floated freely and predators were rare, there had been little reason to move quickly. But once hunting became a regular part of life, everything began to change. A predator that could reach its prey even slightly faster gained a powerful advantage. A hunter able to close the distance before its target escaped was far more likely to survive and reproduce. Over countless generations, this simple reality began shaping the bodies of animals across the oceans. Muscles grew stronger. Bodies became more flexible. Nervous systems developed greater control over movement, allowing animals to respond rapidly to changes in their environment. The ocean, once filled with drifting organisms, was slowly becoming a world of motion. Some early predators evolved bodies capable of swimming with remarkable efficiency. Long, flexible shapes allowed them to undulate through the water, pushing themselves forward with controlled waves of muscle. By reducing resistance against the surrounding water, these animals could travel farther and faster than their slower ancestors. Others took a different evolutionary path. Certain hunters developed segmented limbs that allowed them to crawl or dart across the seafloor with sudden bursts of speed. Jointed appendages gave them control and power, enabling them to lunge toward prey hiding among rocks or sediment. For prey species, these changes introduced a terrifying new challenge. Even the strongest armor could not guarantee safety if a predator could simply outrun you. Animals that once depended on slow movement suddenly faced hunters capable of pursuit. The distance that once protected them was shrinking. A drifting grazer might notice a predator approaching, yet find that escape was no longer possible. The ocean had become faster. This shift forced prey species to adapt once again. Some animals began spending more time hidden beneath the seafloor, where predators could not easily follow. Fossilized burrows from this period reveal increasingly complex tunnel systems carved beneath the sediment. Other species develop simple escape responses. At the slightest disturbance in the water, they would jerk their bodies suddenly and propel themselves away from danger. Even a brief burst of speed could be enough to evade capture, and gradually, some prey began evolving greater speed of their own. Bodies that could respond quickly to threats survived more often than those that remained slow and vulnerable. In this way, the arms race between predator and prey continued pushing both sides toward new levels of performance. The ancient oceans were becoming ecosystems defined not just by strength or defense, but by motion itself. Predators hunted through pursuit. Prey escaped through speed or concealment. Every movement carried meaning. Every reaction influenced survival. The water that once carried life gently through its currents now hosted sudden bursts of action. A predator might accelerate in pursuit of a fleeing organism. A startled animal might dart toward the safety of the seabed. Life had entered a new phase where timing and movement mattered more than ever before. For the first time in the history of Earth, the oceans contained animals capable of true pursuit. Yet speed alone was not enough to ensure success. Even the fastest predator could lose its target if it lacked the tools to capture and control struggling prey. Seeing a target and reaching it quickly were only the first steps of a much more complex interaction. Evolution was already preparing the next transformation. With sharper vision and greater speed, predators were beginning to develop something even more powerful, specialized body structures designed specifically for hunting. As the ancient oceans filled with faster hunters and increasingly cautious prey, evolution began reshaping the bodies of predators in remarkable ways. Speed and vision had already changed how animals interacted with one another, but another transformation was quietly unfolding beneath the surface. Certain creatures were no longer evolving merely to survive within their environment. Their bodies were being redesigned for a single purpose: to hunt. Earlier predators had often relied on chance encounters. A grasping limb, a sudden movement, or a fortunate collision with drifting prey could provide a meal. But in the increasingly complex ecosystems of the Cambrian seas, such opportunistic feeding was no longer enough. Success required control. Predators began developing specialized structures capable of seizing and holding struggling animals. Flexible appendages that once served multiple purposes gradually evolved into tools designed specifically for capture. Some limbs became lined with spines that prevented prey from slipping free. Others curved inward like hooks, forming natural traps that tightened once contact was made. These appendages allowed predators to maintain control, even as their prey attempted to escape. At the same time, mouthparts were undergoing their own transformation. Early feeding structures that once filtered or absorbed food from the surrounding water began evolving into stronger and more precise mechanisms. Edges hardened, plates sharpened. Some mouths became capable of slicing soft tissue, while others developed crushing surfaces able to break through protective layers. The act of feeding was becoming increasingly specialized. For the first time in Earth's history, animals were evolving bodies that appeared purpose, built for predation. Every structure, every movement, every sensory advantage worked together to improve the predator's ability to capture and consume prey. And within these anatomical changes, an even more important development was quietly taking shape. The earliest foundations of jaws were beginning to appear. True jaws, as seen in later vertebrates, had not yet evolved in these early Cambrian predators. But the structural groundwork for such innovations was emerging. Certain feeding mechanisms allowed predators to close their mouths with greater force and precision than ever before. These improvements allowed hunters to grip prey firmly and apply pressure in controlled ways. Instead of relying solely on external limbs to capture food, predators could now use their mouths as powerful tools of control. It was a small step in evolutionary terms, yet its consequences would echo across hundreds of millions of years. Because once jaws evolved fully, they would become one of the most successful innovations in the entire history of life. Fish, reptiles, birds, and mammals would all inherit this fundamental structure, using it to hunt, defend themselves, and interact with their environment. The blueprint for that future was already emerging in the bodies of these ancient predators. They were no longer experimental forms drifting through evolutionary possibilities. They were becoming specialists, animals whose anatomy reflected the pressures of a world defined by pursuit and survival. Predators had evolved from accidental opportunists into organisms, built specifically for the act of hunting. The oceans now contained creatures equipped with tools for detection, speed, and capture. Their bodies worked as coordinated systems designed to locate prey, pursue it through the water, and maintain control until the struggle ended. What had begun as a simple experiment in feeding had transformed into a sophisticated biological strategy, and the influence of those early adaptations would reach far beyond the Cambrian seas. The same fundamental principles, grasping limbs, powerful mouths, controlled movement, would appear again and again in later predators. Fish would inherit them, reptiles would refine them, mammals would adapt them in new ways. The evolutionary design for hunting had been written, but as predators became more efficient, their success began changing the structure of life itself. Ecosystems that once operated in simple patterns were reorganizing under the pressure of this growing arms race. The consequences of that transformation would shape every living community that followed. Long before predators as appeared, the oceans operated under a quiet simplicity. Energy flowed gently through the living world, moving from microscopic producers to drifting animals that filtered nourishment from the water. Life depended on sunlight, currents, and patience. Few organisms interacted directly with one another in ways that dramatically altered survival. But once predators entered the ecosystem, that calm exchange began to change. The act of one animal consuming another created a new pathway for energy to move through the environment. Instead of drifting gradually between organisms, energy could now pass directly from prey to hunter. This change might appear small at first glance, yet it quietly transformed the structure of life. The earliest layers of this new system were already present in ancient oceans. Near the surface, microscopic organisms continue to capture sunlight and convert it into living matter. These tiny producers formed the foundation of marine life, multiplying in enormous numbers and feeding countless small grazers below. Many animals still survived by filtering these particles from the water or grazing on microbial films covering the seafloor. But now something new stood above them. Predators. Small hunters began feeding on the grazers that once lived relatively undisturbed, and those predators in turn could become food for larger hunters that possessed stronger limbs, sharper mouthparts, or faster bodies. Energy was now traveling through several layers of life rather than passing through a single quiet exchange. A tiny organism nourished by sunlight might be consumed by a grazer. That grazer might then be captured by a predator moving through the water, and that predator could itself fall victim to a larger hunter waiting nearby. The oceans had begun forming the first true food chains. These chains were not rigid or predictable. They twisted and overlapped, connecting countless species in ways that scientists still study today. Each organism played a role within the growing network of relationships, influencing the survival of others around it. The result was a far more dynamic ecosystem. Predators did something unexpected as they spread through the oceans. By feeding on certain species, they prevented those populations from growing without limit. A grazer that multiplied too quickly might consume all available food in its habitat, leaving little for others. But predators reduced these numbers, allowing plant life and smaller organisms to recover. In this way, hunters became quiet regulators of the ecosystem. Their presence kept populations balanced, ensuring that no single species overwhelmed the environment. The oceans became places where growth, consumption, and recovery occurred in delicate cycles. Over time, these layered relationships created conditions that supported greater biodiversity. When predators limited dominant species, new forms of life gained space to evolve and flourish. Habitats became more varied, and ecosystems grew richer with interacting organisms. The ancient seas were beginning to resemble the living systems we know today. Coral reefs, forests, grasslands, and open oceans all operate through similar chains of connection. Producers capture energy from the environment. Grazers feed upon them. Predators control those populations. Larger predators may even control the hunters themselves. The structure of modern ecosystems can be traced back to this ancient transformation. Predation did far more than introduce danger into the oceans. It reorganized the entire economy of life. Energy no longer flowed quietly from one level to another. It moved through complex networks of interaction, shaping the success or failure of species across entire habitats. The calm ecosystems of early life had evolved into living systems filled with balance, competition, and cooperation. Yet, even within these growing food chains, not all predators were equal. Some hunters possessed greater strength, sharper senses, or more efficient methods of capturing prey. And as ecosystems continued to grow more complex, a few predators began rising above the rest. As the food chains of the ancient oceans grew longer and more intricate, a quiet pattern began to emerge. Some predators hunted small grazers. Larger hunters preyed upon those predators. Yet within this layered system, a few species gradually rose higher than the rest. At the top of the chain stood animals with very few enemies of their own. These were the earliest apex predators. In ecosystems shaped by predation, such a role almost always appears. As hunting strategies improve and bodies evolve for greater strength or control, certain predators gain advantages that place them above other hunters. They become the final link in the chain, feeding freely while facing little threat from anything around them. In the Cambrian oceans, several creatures began occupying this powerful position. Among them were advanced arthropods, animals whose bodies were built for both movement and capture. Their jointed limbs allowed them to maneuver quickly through the water, or across the seafloor. Some possessed grasping appendages capable of holding a wide variety of prey. Others combined speed, vision, and strength in ways that few animals of their time could match. These hunters did not rely on a single type of food. They could capture small grazers drifting through the water, seize armored animals crawling along the sediment, or overpower weaker predators competing for the same resources. Their versatility made them formidable. Unlike specialized predators that depended on one narrow food source, these hunters could adapt to changing conditions. If one type of prey became scarce, they could pursue another. Such flexibility allowed them to remain dominant within their ecosystems. But their influence extended far beyond their own survival. Apex predators play a remarkable role within any living system. By feeding on a wide range of species, they quietly control population sizes across entire habitats. Without them, certain animals might multiply rapidly and consume resources faster than ecosystems can recover. In this way, the presence of a powerful hunter can stabilize the environment. When apex predators roam a habitat, prey animals must remain cautious. Grazers cannot expand endlessly because predators reduce their numbers. Smaller hunters cannot dominate completely because they too may become prey. Balance emerges through tension. The ancient oceans were beginning to display this delicate structure. Each level of life influenced the one above and below it. Grazers depended on microscopic producers. Predators depended on grazers. Apex hunters regulated the entire system by controlling populations at multiple levels. It was an ecological hierarchy that would repeat itself again and again across the history of life. Even today, the same principle shapes ecosystems around the world. Wolves influence the behavior of deer across forests. Sharks regulate fish populations in coral reefs. Large predators help maintain the stability of environments that might otherwise collapse under imbalance. The roots of that ecological pattern stretch back to these early oceans. The Cambrian seas had evolved into living systems defined by relationships of power and restraint. Predators hunted prey, yet they also prevented any single species from dominating the environment. The result was a world where diversity could flourish. The oceans were no longer simple communities of drifting organisms. They had become ecosystems structured by hierarchy, interaction, and constant adaptation. And at the top of those systems, the earliest apex hunters moved with quiet authority. Yet the evolutionary influence of predators was not destined to remain beneath the waves. As life continued exploring new environments, the forces that shaped the oceans would begin expanding into unfamiliar territory, because eventually the struggle between hunter and prey would leave the sea behind. By the time complex food chains had formed in the ancient oceans, something profound had already taken hold. Predation was no longer a rare experiment or a temporary phase in the story of life. It had become one of the central forces shaping how organisms lived, moved, and evolved. From that moment forward, no species could exist entirely outside the influence of the hunter and the hunted. In the quiet ages before predators appeared, evolution moved along a slower and more predictable path. Organisms adapted to currents, sunlight, and the gentle flow of nutrients through their environment. But once hunting entered the world, survival began to depend on something far more demanding. Every creature now faced a question that had never existed before. How do you avoid becoming someone else's meal? For prey species, the answers took many forms. Bodies hardened into shells or armor. Some animals developed spines that discouraged predators from swallowing them. Others learned to hide beneath sediment or blend into the surrounding landscape. For predators, evolution followed a different path. Hunters grew faster, stronger, and more precise. Eyes sharpened to detect movement in dim water. Limbs evolved for gripping, and mouths adapted to break through defenses. The entire living world had entered a cycle of pressure and response. Over countless generations, this struggle began shaping traits that would later become familiar throughout the animal kingdom. Speed, once unnecessary in peaceful seas, became a vital advantage for both pursuit and escape. Camouflage allowed prey to vanish against their surroundings. Sensory systems grew more refined, enabling animals to detect danger before it arrived. Even behavior itself began changing. Animals developed instincts that encouraged caution, hiding, or rapid escape. Groups of individuals sometimes moved together, reducing the chances that any one animal would be captured. These strategies, so common in modern ecosystems, can trace their origins back to the earliest predator-prey encounters. Predation had become a powerful engine of innovation. It pushed life toward greater complexity. Organisms that once drifted passively through their environments were now evolving bodies and behaviors capable of responding to constant challenges. The simple ecosystems of early oceans gradually transformed into dynamic systems where survival required awareness, adaptation, and resilience. And the influence of this transformation did not end with the Cambrian seas. Every major ecosystem that followed inherited the consequences of that ancient shift. Forests, coral reefs, grasslands, and open oceans all operate according to the same fundamental relationship between predator and prey. Energy moves through layers of hunters and hunted, creating the balance that allows life to flourish. Without predators, ecosystems might remain simple and fragile. A single species could dominate unchecked, exhausting resources and destabilizing entire habitats. But the presence of hunters introduces limits, shaping populations and preserving diversity. In a strange way, danger helps sustain life. The silent rise of early predators did far more than change the oceans where it began. It altered the direction of evolution itself. The arms race between hunter and prey pushed life toward new levels of complexity, producing animals with sharper senses, stronger bodies, and more sophisticated behaviors. And the consequences of that struggle would echo far into the future, because evolution was not finished experimenting. Within certain lineages of early animals, new anatomical structures were beginning to appear, structures that would allow predators to capture prey with greater power and precision than ever before. The next turning point in the story of life was already approaching. Soon, the oceans would witness the rise of creatures equipped with one of the most successful evolutionary innovations in history: jaws. For hundreds of millions of years, predators hunted without the structure that modern animals now consider essential. They grasped, trapped, or crushed their prey using limbs, plates, or simple mouth openings. But none possessed what we would recognize as true jaws. Even the most capable hunters of those early oceans relied on methods that now seem almost primitive. Yet beneath the surface of this ancient world, evolution was quietly constructing something extraordinary. Among the earliest vertebrates, small fish-like animals that moved through the water with flexible bodies, there existed a series of delicate structures called gill arches. These arches formed a framework inside the throat, supporting the soft tissues that allowed the animal to extract oxygen from passing water. Each time the creature opened its mouth, water flowed across these arches, delivering the oxygen necessary for life. The system was simple, efficient, and had served countless generations of animals without much change. But evolution rarely leaves useful structures alone. Within some populations of these early vertebrates, subtle variations began to appear in the shape and strength of the front gill arches. At first, these changes had little to do with feeding. Slightly thicker arches might have provided better support for the delicate tissues involved in breathing. Small modifications in muscle attachment may have helped regulate water flow more precisely. The changes seemed minor, almost invisible in the grand history of life. But over time, something remarkable began to happen. The front arches started shifting their role. Instead of serving only as supports for breathing structures, they began interacting with the mouth itself. Muscles that once helped pump water across the gills started influencing how the mouth opened and closed. Gradually, the front of the throat became more rigid and more controlled. These animals still lacked true jaws, but the architecture of their bodies was changing. The first hints of a biting mechanism were beginning to form. For a long time, the oceans were dominated by jawless fish. These early vertebrates moved slowly through the water, feeding on soft organisms, algae, or organic particles drifting through the currents. Their mouths functioned mainly as suction devices, pulling in water and filtering out edible material. They survived well in the ecosystems of their time, yet their feeding strategies were limited. Meanwhile, within a few evolving lineages, those modified gill arches continued changing. Bone and cartilage strengthened their structure. Muscles that once helped regulate breathing began exerting greater control over the opening and closing of the mouth. The transformation was gradual, unfolding across millions of years. At first, these animals may simply have been better at gripping soft food or holding it in place while swallowing. But the structural foundation of something far more powerful was emerging. A mechanism capable of applying pressure. A framework capable of holding prey securely. A system that could eventually tear, crush, and control living animals with remarkable efficiency. All of it had begun with structures designed for breathing. It is one of evolution's most fascinating patterns, a tool created for one purpose slowly transformed into something entirely different. What once filtered oxygen from water was being reshaped into one of the most effective feeding mechanisms in the history of life. The blueprint of a bite was quietly taking shape. No predator yet possessed the crushing jaws that would dominate later oceans, but the foundation had been laid deep within the anatomy of these early vertebrates. Once the transformation was complete, the consequences would ripple across every ecosystem on Earth, because when jaws finally appeared, predators would gain a level of control over their prey unlike anything evolution had seen before. And the oceans would never be the same. When jaws finally appeared in the ancient oceans, they did not arrive quietly. The change had been preparing for millions of years within the bodies of early vertebrates. Yet once the mechanism was fully formed, the consequences spread rapidly across marine ecosystems. For the first time in the history of life, predators possessed a tool capable of gripping prey with controlled force. The oceans were entering a new era. During the Silurian and Devonian periods, early jawed fish began appearing in growing numbers. Compared with the jawless animals that had dominated earlier seas, these newcomers possessed a remarkable advantage. Their mouths were no longer simple openings used to draw in water or soft food. Instead, their jaws could close with strength and precision, allowing them to seize and manipulate prey directly. This single innovation transformed the way predators interacted with the world around them. Among the most striking of these early hunters were the placoderms. These ancient fish were unlike anything swimming in modern oceans. Their heads and upper bodies were protected by thick plates of bony armor, forming a rigid shield around the most vulnerable parts of their anatomy. Beneath that armor lay powerful muscles connected to strong jaw structures capable of snapping shut with impressive force. Placoderms did not possess teeth in the way modern fish do. Instead, their jaws carried sharpened bony plates that formed cutting edges. When the mouth closed, these plates pressed together like enormous shears. The result was a weapon capable of slicing through flesh and crushing defensive structures that had once protected prey from earlier predators. For animals living in those seas, this new kind of hunter represented a dramatic escalation in danger. Shell-bearing organisms that once relied on armor for protection could now be broken open by powerful bites. Smaller fish that might have escaped slower predators now faced hunters capable of both speed and crushing force. Predation had entered a new phase. Earlier predators had depended on limbs, suction, or chance encounters to capture food. Jawed fish possessed something far more effective. They could seize prey directly, hold it securely, and apply mechanical force to subdue it. Luck was no longer the primary factor in hunting success. Power had entered the equation. Many of these early vertebrate predators were also fast swimmers. Their streamlined bodies allowed them to move efficiently through the water, closing the distance between themselves and their targets with surprising speed. Once within reach, their jaws could do the rest. The combination of mobility and biting strength made them extraordinarily effective hunters. Their success quickly reshaped the ecosystems around them. Species that had previously lived with little fear of vertebrate predators now faced entirely new pressures. Shells thickened in some animals. Others adopted behaviors that allowed them to hide or escape before an attack could occur. The arms race that had begun in earlier oceans now intensified again. Yet the rise of jawed fish represented more than just a new predator. It marked the beginning of a long evolutionary lineage that would eventually produce many of the most familiar animals on Earth. Nearly every modern vertebrate, from sharks to reptiles to mammals, carries within its anatomy the legacy of those early jaws. The innovation had become one of the most successful designs evolution ever produced. As these jawed predators spread across the oceans, their influence continued growing. Some species remained relatively small hunters feeding on invertebrates and other fish, but others began evolving into larger, more powerful forms. And among those expanding lineages, certain predators would grow so formidable that they redefined what it meant to dominate an ecosystem. As jaws spread through the oceans and vertebrate hunters multiplied, evolution began producing predators unlike anything the earlier seas had ever known. What had started as a quiet anatomical innovation now allowed animals to dominate their environments with a level of power that earlier predators could never achieve. By the time the Devonian period arrived, the oceans had become a very different world. This era is often called the Age of Fishes, and for good reason. Vertebrate life flourished in extraordinary diversity. Streams, coastal waters, and deep marine environments were filled with fish of many shapes and sizes, some small and delicate, others heavily armored and formidable. Within this expanding world of vertebrate life, a few species rose above the rest. These were the superpredators of the Devonian seas. Among them, one creature has captured the imagination of scientists and storytellers alike. Its name is Dunkleosteus, and in its time it stood as one of the most powerful hunters ever to inhabit Earth's oceans. Dunkleosteus was not merely large. Some individuals likely reached lengths of 8 meters or more, their massive bodies armored with thick plates that protected the head and upper torso. These bony shields formed a kind of living fortress around the predator's most vital structures. But its most remarkable feature lay within its mouth. Instead of teeth, Dunkleosteus possessed enormous bony plates that formed the edges of its jaws. These plates sharpened into blade-like surfaces capable of slicing through flesh and crushing bone. When the jaws closed, the plates acted like giant shears, exerting tremendous pressure on whatever lay between them. Modern studies of fossilized skull structures suggest that Dunkleosteus could open and close its mouth with astonishing speed. The motion may have created a sudden suction force that pulled prey inward just as the jaws snapped shut. The entire action likely took only a fraction of a second. For smaller animals living in those seas, the attack would have been almost impossible to escape. And what makes this predator particularly fascinating is how versatile it may have been. Fossil evidence suggests that Dunkleosteus did not rely on a single type of prey. It likely hunted other fish, armored animals, and perhaps even members of its own species. In some fossil specimens, bite marks and damaged plates hint at violent encounters between individuals. These scars tell quiet stories of struggles that unfolded hundreds of millions of years ago. The Devonian oceans had become places ruled by powerful vertebrate predators. Hunters like Dunkleosteus moved through these waters with few natural enemies. Their size, armor, and extraordinary biting power placed them firmly at the top of the food chain. Beneath them existed a hierarchy of smaller predators and prey species, each navigating the dangers of an ecosystem defined by strength and survival. For millions of years, such superpredators dominated marine life. Their presence shaped the evolution of countless other organisms. Smaller fish adapted to evade them. Armored species strengthened their defenses. Entire ecosystems organized themselves around the influence of these powerful hunters. Yet, even the most dominant predators cannot escape the long arc of evolution. History has shown again and again that no group of animals remains at the top forever. Environmental changes, new adaptations, and unexpected evolutionary paths eventually alter the balance. The reign of the Devonian superpredators would be no exception. Though creatures like Dunkleosteus ruled the oceans for vast stretches of time, the forces of evolution were already preparing something new, while these armored giants controlled the seas. Another transformation was quietly beginning elsewhere on the planet. Beyond the shoreline, life itself was starting to explore a world that had remained largely untouched. The land. For hundreds of millions of years, nearly every chapter in the story of predators had unfolded beneath the waves. The oceans had been the stage for the rise of hunters, the evolution of armor, and the endless struggle between pursuit and escape. Yet beyond the shoreline, another world waited, vast, empty, and strangely quiet. The land. For much of Earth's early history, the continents were barren places. Rocks baked under the sun, winds swept across open ground, and only thin films of microbial life clung to the surface. Compared to the vibrant oceans, the land seemed almost lifeless, but slowly, that began to change. Plants were among the first pioneers. Primitive vegetation spread across damp soil near rivers and coastlines, sending thin stems upward toward the sunlight. Moss-like growths clung to rocks, while early vascular plants formed the beginnings of small forests. Their roots helped stabilize soil, and their decaying remains created the first layers of rich organic matter on land. Fungi followed closely behind, weaving networks through the ground and breaking down plant material. Together, these early organisms transformed the once barren continents into environments capable of supporting more complex life. The world above water was beginning to breathe during the late Devonian and Carboniferous periods. This transformation accelerated. Vast swampy forests spread across continents, filled with towering plants whose ancestors would eventually form the coal deposits we mine today. The air within these humid forests carried unusually high levels of oxygen, creating conditions unlike anything found in the modern atmosphere. Within this expanding landscape, animals began appearing. The first to arrive were arthropods, ancestors of modern insects, spiders, and centipedes. Their bodies were already well suited for life outside the water. Protective exoskeletons prevented excessive water loss, while jointed limbs allowed them to crawl across solid ground. Most importantly, many arthropods possessed simple breathing systems that could function in air. They crept across damp soil, climbed over fallen plants, and explored the growing forests of the ancient world. Compared with the bustling oceans, these early land ecosystems were still relatively simple. Food sources consisted mainly of plant material, fungal growth, and decaying organic matter scattered across the forest floor. For a time, life on land existed in a kind of quiet balance. Many of these early animals were grazers or scavengers. They fed on leaves, spores, and organic debris, moving slowly through a world that offered few immediate threats. The forests were dense and humid, filled with rustling plants and drifting clouds of spores carried by the warm air. Yet the pattern that had transformed the oceans was already waiting to repeat itself. Wherever prey exists, predators eventually follow. Among the growing populations of terrestrial arthropods, small variations began appearing once again. Some individuals developed stronger limbs capable of gripping or holding struggling prey. Others evolved mouthparts that could pierce or crush softer bodies. A few began producing primitive venoms, chemical weapons capable of subduing animals larger than themselves. These changes were subtle at first, barely noticeable in the quiet ecosystems of early forests. But evolution rarely stops experimenting. Within the dense vegetation and shadowed undergrowth, the first land predators were quietly emerging. Creatures that once grazed on plants began discovering the advantages of hunting other animals. A grasping limb could capture a passing insect. A venomous bite could immobilize a rival scavenger. The peaceful forests were beginning to change. The logic of predation, which had already reshaped the oceans, was now spreading across the continents. And once predators established themselves on land, the ecosystems above water would begin evolving in ways remarkably similar to those that had transformed the seas millions of years earlier. The forests of the Carboniferous world were unlike anything that exists today. Vast wetlands stretched across continents, their landscapes filled with towering plants, thick ferns, and dense swamps that trapped warm moisture beneath heavy canopies. The air itself was different from the atmosphere we breathe now. Oxygen levels were far higher than in the modern world, creating conditions that allowed certain animals to grow far larger than their descendants ever could. Within this strange environment, arthropods flourished. Insects, millipedes, and other segmented creatures spread through the forests in astonishing variety. Their jointed limbs carried them across muddy ground, along tree trunks, and through tangled vegetation. What had once been small pioneers of the land were now becoming dominant inhabitants of these ancient ecosystems. And some of them were enormous. The high oxygen content of the atmosphere allowed arthropods to grow to sizes that would seem almost unbelievable today. Creatures that might otherwise remain small could now support larger bodies and stronger muscles. Over time, certain species expanded into forms that dwarf their modern relatives. Above the forests, the skies were patrolled by giant flying insects. Among them were dragonfly, like predators known today as griffinflies. Their wings could stretch more than 2 feet across, making them some of the largest flying hunters ever to live. When they glided through the humid air above the swamps, their long wings cut silently through the mist. These insects were aerial predators. Their large compound eyes allowed them to detect movement from impressive distances. Once prey was spotted, they could accelerate through the air with sudden bursts of speed, intercepting smaller flying insects before they had time to react. The skies of the Carboniferous forests were no longer peaceful. They belonged to hunters. On the forest floor, other arthropods prowled through the shadows beneath towering plants. Some resembled massive centipedes, their long bodies supported by rows of coordinated legs that carried them silently through fallen leaves and damp soil. These hunters likely relied on venom to subdue prey. A quick strike from their jaws could deliver toxins capable of immobilizing smaller animals. Once the prey stopped struggling, the predator could begin feeding in relative safety. Within the dim undergrowth, such encounters would have been common. The forests were alive with motion. Small arthropods crawled through decaying plant matter, feeding on organic debris or fungi. But these animals also served as food for larger hunters waiting among the roots and shadows. Predation had spread fully into the terrestrial world. The ecosystems of the Carboniferous period were filled with relationships that feel strangely familiar today. Flying predators captured insects in the air. Ground hunters ambushed prey along forest floors. Smaller animals attempted to hide, escape, or reproduce quickly enough to survive. Although the creatures themselves looked alien, the patterns of life were recognizable. The ancient forests had become living systems, shaped by the same tension between hunter and prey that once transformed the oceans. And in many ways, arthropods ruled this world. Their diversity and adaptability allowed them to occupy nearly every corner of the landscape. From the treetops to the swampy ground below, they dominated the early ecosystems of the land. Yet their reign would not last forever. Evolution was preparing another shift, one that would introduce entirely new predators into the forests. While giant insects ruled the skies and arthropods hunted across the forest floor, a different group of animals was slowly adapting to life outside the water. They were vertebrates, and once these new hunters fully emerged, the balance of power on land would begin to change. The forests of the Carboniferous world already held hunters. Giant insects patrolled the humid skies, while venomous arthropods prowled through the shadows of fallen plants. For a time, these creatures dominated life on land, shaping the delicate balance between predator and prey within the dense wetlands of the ancient continents. But evolution was preparing another arrival. Near the edges of rivers and swamps, a group of animals that had once lived almost entirely in water was slowly adapting to life on land. These were early vertebrates, amphibian-like creatures whose ancestors had first ventured out of shallow seas millions of years earlier. Their bodies were changing in remarkable ways. Stronger limbs allowed them to push their weight across muddy ground, rather than simply swim through water. Their lungs improved, enabling them to breathe air more efficiently. Eyes that once looked through water now adapted to the brighter, open world above the surface. At first, these animals remained tied closely to watery environments. They lingered along shorelines, crept through swampy channels, and rested among the damp vegetation where moisture remained plentiful. Yet even these early steps onto land carried enormous consequences. Because once vertebrates could move across solid ground, they gained access to an entirely new source of food. The forests were full of arthropods. Small insects, larvae, and crawling creatures filled the leaf litter and decaying plant matter beneath the towering Carboniferous vegetation. For the newly arrived vertebrates, these animals provided an opportunity that earlier land hunters had never faced. A new predator had entered the ecosystem. Some of these early tetrapods began feeding on insects and smaller arthropods. Their mouths, lined with simple but effective teeth, could grip and hold prey long enough to swallow it. Compared with the delicate mouth parts of many arthropods, vertebrate jaws offered a powerful advantage. They could clamp down with surprising force. Over time, natural selection began refining these hunting abilities. Certain species evolved stronger jaws capable of holding struggling prey more securely. Teeth sharpened and multiplied along the edges of their mouths, allowing them to capture animals that might otherwise escape. Their limbs also improved. Muscles strengthened, allowing them to move more confidently across uneven ground. These changes made them more capable of pursuing prey through dense vegetation or along muddy forest floors. For the first time, vertebrate predators were competing directly with arthropods for dominance on land. The balance of terrestrial ecosystems began to shift. Arthropods still ruled many parts of the forest, yet the presence of vertebrate hunters introduced a new level of competition. These amphibian-like predators were larger, stronger, and capable of consuming a wider variety of prey. Where they appeared, the dynamics of hunting changed. The forests of the Carboniferous period were no longer dominated solely by insects and segmented creatures. Vertebrate hunters had joined the struggle, bringing with them anatomical advantages that would shape the future of life on land. And those early hunters were only the beginning. Over immense stretches of time, their descendants would evolve into an astonishing variety of forms. Some would give rise to reptiles capable of ruling deserts and forests. Others would eventually produce dinosaurs, animals that would dominate the planet for millions of years. Still others would lead to mammals, including the predators that roam the world today. The moment vertebrates learned to hunt on land marked the beginning of one of the most important transitions in evolutionary history, because once hunting spread across both land and sea, evolution began exploring strategies far more complex than simple pursuit or ambush. New kinds of hunters were about to appear, predators that relied not only on strength or speed, but on increasingly sophisticated ways of capturing prey. For much of the story so far, predators have seemed like creatures of motion. Hunters chased prey through ancient oceans, darted across seafloors, or glided through the humid skies of Carboniferous forests. Speed, strength, and sharp senses appeared to define success. Yet evolution rarely settles for a single solution. Some predators discovered a very different path, one that relied not on pursuit, but on patience. In ecosystems filled with movement, chasing prey required energy. Muscles burned resources with every burst of speed. A hunter that missed its target might spend valuable time searching again, growing weaker while opportunities slipped away. But what if the predator did not need to chase at all? Some ancient hunters began experimenting with stillness. Instead of roaming endlessly through their environment, they waited. They remained motionless among rocks, plants, or sediment, allowing the world to move around them. The strategy seemed simple, yet its effectiveness was profound. Camouflage became one of the most powerful tools in this quiet style of hunting. A predator whose body blended perfectly with the surrounding environment could remain nearly invisible. Colors matched the patterns of stone or vegetation. Body shapes mimicked broken branches, coral formations, or ripples of sand. Toe-passing prey, nothing seemed unusual. Beneath the ocean floor, some predators buried themselves within the sediment, leaving only their eyes exposed above the surface. Others pressed their bodies against rocks or vegetation, becoming part of the landscape itself. In forests, certain arthropods clung to leaves or bark, waiting in silence for smaller animals to wander within reach. The predator did not need to move. Eventually the prey would. When the moment arrived, the attack happened with startling speed. Muscles that had remained perfectly still suddenly unleashed their stored energy. Limbs snapped forward, jaws closed. The prey, often unaware of the danger until the final instant, had little chance to escape. This style of hunting required remarkable control. An ambush predator needed patience, remaining motionless for long periods without revealing its presence. Even the slightest unnecessary movement could betray its location. The success of the strategy depended on restraint as much as power. Yet the reward for such patience was efficiency. Unlike pursuit predators that expended energy chasing prey across long distances, ambush hunters could conserve their strength. They waited until opportunity came close enough to guarantee success. When the attack was launched, it often ended quickly. Across evolutionary time, this strategy proved remarkably successful. Ambush predators appeared again and again in different environments. In ancient oceans, some hunters hid beneath sediment or within coral structures. On land, arthropods and early vertebrates concealed themselves among plants and shadows. The same principle continued appearing in later ecosystems as well. Crocodiles wait beneath the surface of rivers. Spiders build webs or hide within vegetation. Even modern reptiles and fish rely on camouflage and stillness to surprise their prey. The strategy of waiting had become one of evolution's most effective hunting methods. It revealed something important about the nature of predation. Success did not always depend on speed or strength alone. Sometimes survival belonged to the hunter capable of remaining unseen until the final moment. Predation was becoming more than a physical contest. It was becoming a strategic interaction between hunter and prey. Yet ambush was only one path that evolution explored. While some predators relied on patience and concealment, others moved in the opposite direction, refining a strategy built on endurance and relentless motion. Instead of waiting for prey to approach, these hunters pursued their targets across distance, refusing to stop until the chase finally ended. While some predators mastered the quiet discipline of ambush, others followed a very different path. Instead of hiding within the environment and waiting for opportunity to arrive, these hunters moved constantly through their world, searching for prey and closing the distance with relentless determination. For them, survival depended on motion. The strategy of pursuit demanded a body built for endurance and control. Muscles grew stronger and more efficient, capable of sustaining repeated bursts of movement without immediate exhaustion. Limbs evolved shapes that maximize speed, whether through powerful swimming strokes in water or coordinated strides across land. These predators did not rely on surprise alone. They relied on persistence. The earliest examples of pursuit hunting likely appeared in the oceans, where streamlined bodies allowed certain predators to chase prey through open water. Fish with flexible spines and powerful tails could accelerate rapidly, following smaller animals that attempted to escape through the surrounding currents. In such encounters, the outcome depended on more than strength. A prey animal might dart suddenly in one direction, hoping the predator would lose track of its movement. The hunter, in turn, had to react quickly, adjusting its course, maintaining the chase. Every second of the pursuit became a test of speed, coordination, and awareness. Over time, these repeated interactions shaped both sides of the struggle. Prey species began evolving bodies capable of sudden bursts of acceleration. Many developed flexible spines that allowed them to change direction quickly while swimming or running. Others evolved heightened sensory systems that could detect approaching predators sooner, giving them precious moments to flee. But predators adapted as well. Stronger muscles allowed them to maintain speed for longer periods. Improved nervous systems enabled quicker reactions when prey attempted to evade them. The brain itself began playing a more significant role, coordinating movement, balance, and decision-making during the chaos of a chase. The pursuit had become a dynamic conversation between hunter and prey. Each improvement in escapability forced predators to refine their own performance. Each increase in predator speed or stamina pushed prey toward new defensive strategies. Over millions of years, this endless cycle produced animals capable of extraordinary physical feats. Bodies became lighter, faster, and more responsive. The strategy of pursuit spread across many different groups of animals. Marine predators used speed and endurance to chase fish across open water. Early reptiles on land evolved limbs suited for running across dry terrain. Later mammals would refine the approach even further, developing remarkable stamina that allowed them to pursue prey across long distances. In every environment where prey attempted to flee, pursuit predators appeared. What made this strategy particularly powerful was its flexibility. An ambush predator depended heavily on the element of surprise, but a pursuit hunter could adapt as conditions changed. If prey moved into open space, the chase could continue. If the first attack failed, the hunter might simply continue running or swimming until the prey grew tired. Patience played a role here as well, but it was a different kind of patience. Not the stillness of waiting, but the endurance of persistence. For prey animals, this meant that escape often depended on more than a single burst of speed. Survival might require stamina, agility, and the ability to outmaneuver the predator repeatedly until the hunter finally abandoned the chase. Predation had evolved into a contest of movement and intelligence. The endless chase shaped the bodies and behaviors of countless species, driving life toward greater physical performance and sharper awareness of its surroundings. Yet even pursuit was not the final chapter in the evolution of hunting. In time, Some predators would discover a strategy that combined physical ability with something even more powerful: cooperation and planning. The hunt was about to become far more sophisticated. For millions of years, the story of predation had been shaped mainly by physical abilities. Hunters evolved stronger jaws, sharper senses, and faster bodies. Prey responded with armor, camouflage, and speed of their own. The struggle between them seemed driven by instinct alone, a constant contest of survival played out through muscle and movement. Yet slowly, another change began to appear. Some predators started using their environment in ways that hinted at something more than instinct. Imagine a hunter approaching prey not from the open, but from behind rocks or vegetation where its shape was concealed. Instead of attacking immediately, it might circle quietly until the prey moved into a more vulnerable position. In such moments, success depended not only on strength but on timing and awareness. The predator was beginning to use its surroundings as part of the hunt. Fossils rarely capture behavior directly, but scientists often find clues hidden in ancient ecosystems. Certain fossil deposits reveal groups of predators preserved together near clusters of prey species, suggesting that more than one hunter may have been involved in the same encounter. While such evidence cannot prove cooperation with absolute certainty, it hints at the possibility that some early predators moved in ways that increased their collective chances of success. Modern animal behavior offers additional insight. Many predators today use simple strategies that combine movement, positioning, and patience. Some fish herd smaller prey toward confined spaces. Certain reptiles drive animals toward obstacles where escape becomes difficult. These behaviors may have deep evolutionary roots, even without true planning. Predators capable of adjusting their movements in response to prey behavior gained an advantage. A hunter that could anticipate where prey might flee could intercept it more easily than one relying purely on speed. Gradually, predation was becoming more sophisticated. Over immense spans of time, natural selection favored animals capable of responding quickly to changing situations. Nervous systems grew more complex. Sensory organs delivered more detailed information about the surrounding world. Brains capable of processing these signals improved coordination and decision-making during the hunt. The struggle between predator and prey was now shaping not only bodies but minds. In some species, repeated interactions between hunters and prey encouraged behaviors that looked remarkably strategic. A predator might learn to approach quietly rather than charging immediately. Another might wait until prey moved away from protective cover before striking. These adjustments did not require conscious planning as humans understand it, yet they represented early steps towards something greater: learning adaptation. Behavior shaped by experience. Over millions of years, these capabilities would expand dramatically. Certain predators would begin cooperating with others of their kind, coordinating movements during hunts. Communication signals would help them maintain contact while pursuing prey through complex environments. The roots of those abilities can be traced back to these early stages of behavioral evolution. Predation, once a simple act of capture, had become a driving force pushing animals toward greater awareness and responsiveness. The constant challenge of finding, tracking, and overcoming prey rewarded those capable of flexible behavior. In this way, the predator-prey relationship quietly contributed to the rise of intelligence itself. Creatures that could observe, adjust, and react effectively gained a survival advantage. Their descendants carried those traits forward, generation after generation, gradually expanding the cognitive abilities of entire lineages. The silent rise of predators had reshaped ecosystems, bodies, and behaviors across the planet. But its influence reached even further, because the evolutionary pressures created by hunting would eventually give rise to predators capable of something entirely new: communication, cooperation, and complex thought. And among those future hunters would emerge one species whose intelligence would allow it to study the history of life itself. Predation began as instinct, yet over immense spans of time, it helped create the conditions that would eventually produce intelligent hunters. The story that began in ancient oceans had quietly laid the foundation for the modern world. And in the final chapter of this journey, the role of predators would reveal how deeply they have shaped the ecosystems that surround us today. By the time hundreds of millions of years had passed since the first hunter seized its prey in the Cambrian seas, predators had become far more than occasional participants in the story of life. They had grown into one of the most powerful forces shaping the structure of ecosystems across the planet. In many environments, life revolved around them. Predators had evolved into forms that were faster, stronger, and more specialized than anything their ancient ancestors could have imagined. Across oceans, forests, deserts, and rivers, these hunters occupied the highest levels of the food chain, influencing the survival of countless other species. The oceans, once ruled by armored fish and early vertebrate hunters, eventually gave rise to enormous marine reptiles. Creatures such as plesiosaurs and mosasaurs moved through ancient seas with quiet authority. Their long bodies and powerful fins allowed them to glide through water with remarkable control, while their jaws carried rows of sharp teeth designed to seize slippery prey. Fish, squid, and other marine animals filled the waters beneath them, forming the living foundation of their dominance. These predators did not merely exist within the ecosystem, they defined it. On land, a similar pattern unfolded. As reptiles diversified during the age of dinosaurs, certain species above the rest to become apex hunters. Among the most famous was Tyrannosaurus rex, a predator whose immense size and powerful jaws made it one of the most formidable hunters the world had ever seen. With a skull built to deliver crushing bites and senses capable of detecting movement across great distances, it occupied the very top of the food chain in its environment. But the importance of such predators extended far beyond their physical strength. In ecosystems dominated by powerful hunters, prey species could never grow unchecked. Herbivores that consumed plants in vast numbers were kept in balance by the threat of predation. Smaller predators remained cautious, knowing that a larger hunter might turn them into prey. Through this constant pressure, apex predators shaped the behavior and population sizes of countless animals around them. In many ways, they acted as quiet regulators of the natural world. Without them, ecosystems often shift in unexpected ways. Herbivores may multiply until they exhaust plant life. Smaller predators may expand rapidly, disrupting the balance between species. The scalopher. Absence of a top predator can send ripples through the entire food web. But when a powerful hunter occupies the top of the chain, equilibrium often returns. This is one of nature's subtle patterns. The most dangerous animals in an ecosystem can also be the ones that maintain its balance. For millions of years, such predators ruled the earth. They stalked through ancient forests, glided across prehistoric oceans, and roamed landscapes that looked very different from the world we know today. Their presence shaped the evolution of prey. Species influenced the growth of ecosystems and maintained the delicate relationships that allowed life to flourish. Yet no predator, no matter how powerful, holds its position forever. The history of life shows that even the greatest hunters exist within forces larger than themselves. Changes in climate, shifting continents, volcanic eruptions, and catastrophic impacts have repeatedly transformed the environments in which these animals lived. And when the planet changes, even the most dominant predators must adapt or disappear. The reign of giants, impressive as it may seem, has never been permanent, because beyond the struggle between predator and prey lies another force, one capable of reshaping the entire stage on which life unfolds. Even the mightiest hunters cannot escape the power of a changing planet. For millions of years, the great predators of Earth appeared almost unstoppable. Massive hunters patrolled the oceans and roamed across continents, shaping ecosystems through strength and dominance. Their presence influenced the behavior of countless species below them, creating the delicate balance that allowed complex ecosystems to flourish. Yet, the history of life reveals a quiet truth. No predator, no matter how powerful, rules forever. Beyond the daily struggle between hunter and prey lies another force, one that acts on a planetary scale. From time to time, the Earth itself changes in ways that disrupt the entire structure of life. Volcanic eruptions darken the skies with ash. Continents drift into new positions, altering ocean currents and climates. Temperatures rise or fall, transforming habitats across the globe. and sometimes the change arrives suddenly. Throughout Earth's history, catastrophic events have periodically reshaped the living world. Entire ecosystems collapse, and species that once dominated their environments vanish from the fossil record. These moments are known as mass extinctions, and they represent some of the most dramatic turning points in the history of life. For predators, such events can be especially devastating. Apex hunters often rely on complex food chains to survive. When environmental upheaval disrupts those chains, even the most powerful predators struggle to find enough food. Prey populations decline or disappear, and the great hunters that once ruled ecosystems begin to vanish as well. On Earth, the most famous examples occurred about 66 million years ago. At the end of the Cretaceous period, a massive asteroid struck Earth near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. The impact released an unimaginable amount of energy. Dust and debris filled the atmosphere, blocking sunlight and disrupting climates across the planet. In the months and years that followed, ecosystems began collapsing. Plants struggled to grow without sunlight. Herbivores that depended on those plants began dying in large numbers. As prey species disappeared, the predators that hunted them soon followed. Among the animals lost during this catastrophe were the dinosaurs, including many of the largest and most powerful hunters ever to walk the earth. The great reptilian predators that had once dominated forests and plains were suddenly gone. At first glance, such destruction might seem like the end of the story. But extinction does something unexpected. When dominant species disappear, they leave behind empty spaces within ecosystems. The roles they once occupied remain, waiting for new life to evolve into them. In the aftermath of catastrophe, the planet begins rebuilding its ecological networks from whatever organisms survive. And often, those survivors are small, adaptable creatures capable of enduring harsh condition. In the shadow of the dinosaur extinction, mammals found an opportunity they had never experienced before. For millions of years they had lived mostly as small, nocturnal animals, avoiding attention of larger reptilian predators. Now the giants were gone. With ecosystems suddenly lacking large hunters, mammals began expanding into new roles. Some evolved into herbivores that grazed across open landscapes. Others became carnivorous hunters capable of pursuing prey across forests and plains. Within relatively short geological timespans, entirely new predators appeared. Early carnivorous mammals began shaping ecosystems in ways that echoed the influence of their reptilian predecessors. Their descendants would eventually spread across the planet, hunting in oceans, deserts, forests, and grasslands. The lesson hidden within this cycle is both simple and profound. Predators may disappear, but predation itself never vanishes. Life seems compelled to rebuild the relationship between hunter and prey again and again. Whenever ecosystems recover from catastrophe, evolution begins filling the same ecological roles that existed. Before the players change, the roles remain, and with the disappearance of the ancient reptilian hunters, the stage was set for a new group of predators to rise. A group that would eventually reshape the planet in ways no previous hunter ever had. After the disappearance of the great reptilian predators, the world did not remain empty for long. Ecosystems have a way of rebuilding themselves, and once the dominant hunters vanished, new forms of life began moving into the vacant spaces they left behind. Among those rising groups were mammals. For millions of years before the extinction of the dinosaurs, mammals had lived quietly in the shadows. Most were small, cautious creatures that avoided attention from larger predators. They moved through forests at night, feeding on insects, seeds, or small animals, while the giant reptiles ruled the daylight world. But when the dinosaurs disappeared, the balance of life shifted dramatically. The landscapes that once belonged to enormous reptilian hunters were suddenly open. With fewer predators dominating the environment, mammals began expanding into new ecological roles. Some grew larger bodies, others evolved specialized teeth for chewing plants or capturing prey. Among them, a new generation of predators emerged. Early carnivorous mammals developed features that would give them remarkable advantages as hunters. Their teeth sharpened into precise cutting tools, capable of slicing through flesh and bone. Their jaws grew stronger, allowing them to hold struggling prey with confidence. But their most powerful adaptations lay elsewhere. Many mammalian predators possessed highly developed senses. Their hearing was especially sensitive, capable of detecting faint sounds that might reveal the presence of prey moving through vegetation. Their sense of smell allowed them to follow scent trails across great distances, tracking animals that had passed hours earlier. Perhaps most importantly, their brains were becoming more advanced. Compared with many earlier predators, these mammals displayed greater flexibility in behavior. They could adjust their strategies, depending on the environment or the prey they encountered. Some specialized in stealth, creeping through forests until they were close enough to launch a sudden attack. Others became pursuit hunters. Animals that resembled early wolves began chasing prey across open landscapes, relying on stamina and coordination to exhaust their targets. Over time, predators such as saber-toothed cats evolved, powerful forelimbs and enormous fangs designed to subdue large herbivores. These hunters were formidable, not only because of their strength, but also because of their ability to adapt. Unlike many earlier predators that depended heavily on fixed instincts, mammalian hunters could learn from experience. A failed hunt might reveal a new strategy for the next attempt. Young predators could observe and imitate the behaviors of older individuals, gradually refining their skills. In some cases, cooperation even became part of the hunt. Groups of predators working together could surround prey, cut off escape routes, and overwhelm animals far larger than themselves. Such cooperation required awareness, communication, and a level of behavioral complexity rarely seen in earlier evolutionary stages. The nature of predation was changing again. The long evolutionary journey that began with the first grasping limbs in Cambrian seas had now produced hunters capable of planning, learning, and adapting to new challenges. Intelligence was becoming part of the predator's toolkit. This development marked a profound shift in the history of life. Strength, speed, and armor still mattered, but the most successful predators increasingly relied on flexible thinking and cooperation. The struggle between hunter and prey was becoming as much a contest of awareness as of physical power. From these mammalian hunters would arise many of the predators we recognize today. Cats, wolves, bears, and countless other carnivores inherited the traits that allowed their ancestors to dominate evolving ecosystems. Yet even these remarkable animals were not the final step in the story, because evolution was about to produce a predator unlike any that had come before, one whose intelligence would allow it not only to hunt, but to understand the entire history of life. Zelf. For hundreds of millions of years, predators had followed familiar rules. They relied on strength, speed, sharp teeth, or venom. Their bodies were built as weapons, shaped by the relentless pressure of evolution. Hunters across oceans and continents shared the same essential strategy: overpower prey through physical advantage. But eventually, the long story of predation produced something entirely different. A predator whose greatest weapon was not its body, it was its mind. Humans entered the evolutionary landscape as relatively modest animals. Compared with many predators that had come before, early humans were not particularly fast. Their teeth were small, their claws were non-existent. Against the great hunters of the past, massive reptiles or powerful carnivorous mammals, they might have seemed almost fragile. Yet they possessed something those earlier predators did not: a brain capable of extraordinary reasoning and cooperation. Early humans did not hunt by relying solely on speed or strength. Instead, they learned to observe their environment carefully. They studied the movements of animals, recognized patterns in behavior, and used the landscape itself as part of the hunt. Where other predators depended on instinct alone, humans could plan. Groups of hunters worked together, communicating with gestures and sounds that allowed them to coordinate their movements. Instead of rushing directly toward prey, they often approached slowly, guiding animals into positions where escape became difficult. Sometimes the strategy involved patience. Hunters might follow herds for hours or even days, tracking footprints across dry ground, or reading subtle signs left behind in grass and soil. At other times, cooperation became the key to success. Several individuals might move quietly around a herd, driving animals toward narrow passages, or natural barriers. Once the prey was separated from the group, the hunters could close in together, exploiting the animal's exhaustion or confusion. This method of hunting required remarkable endurance. Humans developed the ability to travel long distances across open landscapes without overheating. While many animals rely on short bursts of speed, humans excel at persistence. They can continue moving for extended periods, gradually wearing down prey that cannot sustain such effort. Over time, this endurance hunting strategy proved extremely effective. Even animals far larger and stronger than humans could eventually be captured if pursued long enough. Exhaustion became the hunter's ally. Tools added another powerful dimension to this strategy. Simple stone points attached to wooden shafts allowed hunters to strike prey from a safer distance. Spears and later weapons increased both accuracy and power, enabling humans to hunt animals that would otherwise be far too dangerous to approach. Yet tools alone do not explain the success of human hunters. The true advantage lay in the ability to combine many abilities at once: observation, communication, planning, endurance, and cooperation. Each member of a hunting group played a role within a coordinated strategy. For the first time in the history of life, predation was guided by conscious thought. The evolutionary journey that began with simple grasping limbs in Cambrian seas had eventually produced a predator capable of understanding its prey, anticipating its movements, and adapting its behavior in ways no earlier hunter could match. Among all predators that had ever lived, humans were uniquely equipped to reshape the rules of the hunt itself. But the influence of this unusual predator would extend far beyond the act of hunting, because once humans began spreading across the planet, their presence started transforming ecosystems in ways no predator had ever done before. When humans first appeared as hunters on the ancient landscape, they were only one predator among many. Lions stalked grasslands, wolves moved through forests, and great birds of prey circled above open plains. The natural world still followed the same rules that had shaped life for hundreds of millions of years. Predators hunted, prey escaped, and ecosystems balanced themselves through countless quiet interactions. Yet humans possess something that no predator before them had ever developed: the ability to reshape the environment itself. At first, the changes were small. Early hunters used simple tools of stone and wood to increase their chances of success. Spears extended the reach of their arms. Sharpened edges allowed them to process food more efficiently. Fire offered warmth, protection, and new ways to prepare the animals they captured. But tools were only the beginning. As human societies grew more complex, their influence expanded far beyond individual hunts. People learned to cultivate plants, transforming wild landscapes into fields of agriculture. Forests were cleared to make space for settlements. Rivers were redirected, and animals were domesticated. The role of the human predator was evolving. Instead of relying solely on wild prey, humans began shaping ecosystems to support their needs. Entire landscapes could now be modified to produce food, shelter, and resources. Over time, these changes spread across continents. With the rise of cities, technology, and industry, humanity's influence grew even more powerful. Machines replaced simple aircon. Vast networks of transportation connected distant regions of the planet. Industrial technologies allowed humans to harvest resources on scales never before seen in the natural world. In this new age, humans became the most influential predator Earth had ever known. Many large predators that once dominated ecosystems began disappearing as human populations expanded. Wolves, big cats, and other powerful hunters were driven from areas where they had lived for thousands of years. Some species vanished entirely, unable to adapt to the rapidly changing landscapes created by human activity. The balance between hunter and prey was shifting once again. Yet the story of humanity's role in nature is not simply one of destruction. Humans also possess the ability to observe and understand the ecosystems around them. Through science and careful study, people have begun recognizing how predators influence the health of natural environments. The removal of apex hunters often leads to unexpected consequences: overpopulation of prey species, damaged vegetation, and disrupted food webs. This growing awareness has led to a new chapter in the story of predation. In many parts of the world, Humans now work to protect endangered predators and restore ecosystems that once depended on their presence. Wolves have been reintroduced into certain wilderness areas. Marine reserves protect sharks and other ocean hunters. Conservation efforts seek to preserve the delicate relationships that allow ecosystems to function here. For the first time in the history of life, a predator species has gained the knowledge to reflect on its own impact. Humans now occupy a unique position within the natural world. They are hunters capable of reshaping entire environments, yet they are also guardians capable of preserving them. This dual role carries a profound responsibility because the choices humans make today influence the future of ecosystems across the planet. The same intelligence that once allowed our ancestors to track prey across ancient landscapes now allows us to understand the complex systems that sustain life on Earth. The story of predators has reached a remarkable turning point. And after tracing this journey across hundreds of millions of years, one final question remains. What does this long history of hunting reveal about the deeper forces that shaped life itself? Hundreds of millions of years ago, in the quiet waters of the ancient oceans, something subtle happened. One creature discovered that another living organism could become food. It was a small moment, almost invisible within the vast sweep of geological time. Yet from that single discovery, an extraordinary chain of events began to unfold. The first predator could not have known what it had started. At that time, the oceans were still filled with relatively simple communities. Many organisms drifted peacefully through the water or fed slowly along the seafloor. Life moved at a calm rhythm, shaped mainly by sunlight, nutrients, and the quiet growth of living populations. But once hunting appeared, the rules began to change. Predation introduced a new pressure into the living world. Prey animals could no longer exist without vigilance. They needed protection, speed, or camouflage to survive. Predators, in turn, had to become better hunters to overcome those defenses. From this tension emerged an extraordinary process. Evolution accelerated. Bodies became stronger and more complex. Armor appeared in the form of shells and exoskeletons. Eyes grew sharper, capable of detecting movement in dim water or dense forests. Muscles strengthened to power sudden escapes or relentless pursuit. Nervous systems expanded, allowing animals to react quickly to danger or opportunity. Over immense spans of time, this continuous struggle transformed the planet. Predator and prey pushed each other toward new forms of adaptation. Each improvement in defense inspired a new offensive strategy. Every evolutionary advantage was eventually met with a countermeasure. This ancient rivalry became one of the most powerful engines driving biological diversity. Without it, the living world might have remained far simpler. Organisms might still drift quietly through oceans, feeding passively on microscopic life. Ecosystems might contain fewer species, fewer interactions, and fewer complex relationships. But the rise of predation created something far more dynamic. Food chains formed, linking species together in intricate networks of energy and survival. Ecosystems expanded into layered systems where producers, grazers, hunters, and scavengers all played essential roles. Across coral reefs, dense forests, open grasslands, and deep ocean trenches, life organized itself around the same enduring relationship: hunter and hunted. Even today, every ecosystem on Earth still reflects this ancient balance. Sharks glide silently through ocean waters, searching for fish beneath shifting currents. Wolves move through forests, tracking herds that roam across open valleys. Birds of prey circle high above fields, watching for the slightest movement below. The patterns that shape these encounters were set in motion hundreds of millions of years ago. They began when the first predator learned to hunt. Yet the story carries an unexpected twist. The evolutionary pressures created by predation eventually produced animals capable of understanding those very pressures. Intelligence, cooperation, and awareness emerged gradually within certain species, reaching their most complex expression in humans. For the first time in the history of life, a predator evolved that could study the ancient past and ask questions about how it all began. From quiet Cambrian seas to modern ecosystems filled with astonishing diversity, the influence of predation has never faded. It remains woven into the structure of life itself, and in a quiet sense, the story is still unfolding. Every day, in forests, oceans, deserts, and grasslands, the ancient relationship between predator and prey continues shaping the living world. The balance shifts endlessly, guided by the same forces that first appeared in those distant oceans. The silent rise of early predators did not simply change the past. It helped create the extraordinary living planet we know today.